Andreas, I love that picture. Our marketing department did a great job, even though this trailer is not available for purchase. So we know how to make drinks, and the other company is very well versed when it comes to transporting these drinks to our customers. Great. So a big and a small company. As regards their renown, I'd like to say that Veltins is probably a household name. Most of you will have tasted our products before. You will find them in your refrigerators. But before we get to that, I'd like to briefly tell you who we are. Who's the guy standing on stage in front of you? I'm Andreas Diemel. I'm the head of procurement services. I've been active in procurement ever since the year 2000, and right from the beginning of my career, I've been employed by Veltins. I completed my training in 1994 at Veltins. I am part of the BME Executive Board in the Münster-Westphalia region. I started doing that in December 2018. At the same time, I'm a member of staff of I'm a member of the Sustainability Working Group of the BME. Now, Supply Chain Act. Who's responsible for the Supply Chain Act in a small company? Well, someone's got to do the job, right? And usually it's the head of department that does that. That's me in that case. Now, what are my personal expectations of the Supply Chain Act? Andre asked me to talk about that. So what do we expect of the EU Supply Chain Act that we're going to talk about also? Now, I can't see my screen anymore. Anyway, as a matter of principle, I think it's a good thing that there should be a European Supply Chain Act. But when it comes to the content, the technical details, quite difficult. If you were to, risk assessment, how far should that go? And to what extent can we include our suppliers? There's also confidentiality requirements. How far down do we have to go, Andre? I don't really know. What about you? Well, I'm Andre Lückert. I haven't been with the Schmitz Cargo for so long, only for 18 months. Now, why did I decide to take responsibility for the Supply Chain Act? Well, I used to do that at my previous employer, and this is why I was given that job when I joined Schmitz Cargo. So ever since I completed my studies in 2001, I've been working in the procurement universe. I've worked at different companies. I've always been a member of BME, more in a passive capacity. And when I returned to Münster, the city I was born and raised in, I joined the BME Münster-Westphalia, where I was elected to the executive board back in September. Now, what are my expectations of the European Supply Chain Act? And it's a historic day because today the EU Parliament will have a vote on it. So I'm expecting a simplification of things because there will be more unified standards at the European level. We've done our homework. You're going to see that in a minute, but I believe that in terms of communication towards non-European suppliers, it'll become easier once we've got a unified standard within Europe. Why? Well, when it comes to the CBAM agreement, when we started surveying our suppliers for their CO2 values, they were very well prepared against the backdrop of the EU legislation. They were in a position to come up with the answers we were after within next to no time. So this goes to show the advantage of a harmonized approach, unlike doing it on a national level. Right, Andre. Okay, who are we? You will have seen our vans, our trucks and lorries on the motorway, on the right lane when you pass them. So we are the leading trailer manufacturer in Europe. So anything that comes behind the truck, this is where we come in. We produce 60,000 units per year, but that's not all. We not only manufacture the trailers, we've got a huge data-driven business, data relevant to the trailers, temperature, location of the trailer. What about vibrations on board of the trailer, depending on what you transport? That's quite an important issue. It's not the trailer only. We have a global footprint. You will also find us in Australia, also in the US, where we just acquired a stake in another company. So we do have a global footprint after all. We've got our own environmental standards. We've got an own environmental report that we draft. By the way, we are regularly receiving rewards for our environmental performance in terms of CO2 emissions avoidance. It's about, avoiding and reducing the drag of our trucks. So here our performance is pretty good. Also new technical solutions have received awards. Thank you very much, Andre. Now, it's clear to see who is David, who is Goliath. You've got 6,800 members of staff. The number is not that high in our case. You're going to see that in a minute. Here are the figures for Veltins. Now, a brewery, that's what we are. Of course, we benchmark ourselves against other breweries. How much beer can you produce? We don't measure our performance in liters, rather in hectoliters. 1 hectoliter, that's 100 liters of beer. And last year, we produced 3.6 million hectoliters of beer. We are active in 30 export countries, and our share of recycling is 92%, 13.4% market share in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is our core market, generating 441 million euros in sales. Now, here's some of our members of staff. They actually work in our company. Of course, only the prettiest one were chosen for this picture. The other ones were sent to Hanover. Now, 721 members of staff. And if you add up the numbers, and if you look at that against the backdrop of the Supply Chain Act and why we are dealing with this in the first place, well, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Apart from that, I've decided to bring a couple of pictures so as to show you what's going on in our brewery. Over the past 10 years or so, we invested approximately 400 million euros in our location. There was a construction site all the time. It never stopped, which is why we are pretty state-of-the-art, pretty modern, high-rack warehouses, state-of-the-art conveyor technology. A new brewing house has just been set up, so excellent performance. Me being the head of procurement, I also have to look after purchasing energy, and the prospects are quite good. Why? Well, we've decided that in 10 years down the road, we want to be able to use 100% renewable energies. It's about setting up a proprietary wind farm. We are busy planning our transformation away from gas. How do we get to e-power? Well, in the beer production process, you have to heat it up to more than 100 degrees centigrade, then cool it down. A pretty complicated process. And we are doing all we can to get to 100% renewable energies quickly. Now, here's a snapshot of our product range. Hopefully, you will find some of them in your refrigerator, and here you can see what needs to be done. Top 3. Well, that's our Pils products for the younger target group. We've got 4+ mixed drinks. Helles Pelican, top 4. Might have seen that before. Then there's Grevenstein, our traditional brand. And then there's Fassbrause. So we not only do beer anymore, but like many of you, we've had to diversify our product range, and that's what we've done. Now, talking about the Supply Chain Act, can I ask you, who of you works in the procurement department? Okay, that's quite a lot. Who works in the sales department? None of you. Who of you is affected by the Supply Chain Act? Please raise your hand. Well, not all of you have raised their hands. But let me tell you, all of us, one way or the other, are affected by the Supply Chain Act. 721 members of staff, that's what we have. We've got a number of fully owned subsidiaries, which brings the number to 840 members of staff. But retail's got more than 1,000 people working there, and they're asking us, what are you doing in terms of supply chain? So indirectly, all of us are affected, which is why we decided, okay, we need to look after the ramifications of the Supply Chain Act, and let's pretend that all of us are equally affected, because, it may well be that we exceed the 1,000 people threshold. It only takes a minor acquisition, and that's where we are. So if we were to meet these requirements from zero, from scratch, that would be difficult, and this is why we've decided to pretend that we are already fully affected by the Supply Chain Act to the extent possible. And in how far this differs from Andrew's approach, well, we're going to learn more about that in a minute. Now, speaking about members of staff and staff numbers, we were affected right during the first wave. The Supply Chain Act has affected us bindingly since the 1st of January 2023. Now, here's a number of KPIs that I've brought with me for your benefit, and I'd like to use them to illustrate the challenges that we are facing in the procurement department. We've got 12,000 creditors active in the SAP system, so in terms of doing a risk analysis, we have to observe the 12,000 creditors. The Supply Chain Act dictates to do that for everybody, which is the first challenge. We do a lot of procurement, around our production facilities, both within and without Europe. But that's not all we're doing. We also depend on so-called low-cost countries, to compensate for peaks and to try and keep costs under control as far as possible. So sourcing also takes place in these countries which may be vulnerable to human rights violations. We knew that right from the start. Our procurement volume totals more than 2 billion euros, and the primary products that we tend to buy is steel construction parts. We're using modular systems, tires and wheels, and most of our trailers come with more than 7 wheels on average. We have to buy chassis, cooling aggregates. You cannot possibly buy all of this in Europe. You have to tap into the international markets. So these were some of the challenges, and also for our companies, for our locations themselves, because you not only have to meet these requirements for your suppliers, but also for your own operations. So there came a point in time when we had to try and find out where are the most high-risk countries. Here we are located between the booths of Turkey and Taiwan. So we said that Turkey should be treated as a risky country, at least from the point of view of the Supply Chain Act. What we did was we looked at the human rights list from the UN, and we said that anything below 50 would be classified as a high-risk country, which meant that one of our proprietary locations in Turkey had to be referred to as a at-risk plant. And we had to make sure to watch out for the human rights performance at the level of this particular plant in Turkey. Now, this is our Supply Chain Act organization. And I have to take a step back. The Federal Export Authority asks for, a clear assignment of roles and responsibilities. This is what BAFA is asking for. So I can see that some of you are taking pictures, but let me tell you that our presentation is available on our LinkedIn account. So you will find us if you do a Google search, and if you go to our LinkedIn account, this is where you can find our charts. Of course, you can take photographs, no problem at all. Anyway, what we did was we assigned clear roles and responsibilities under the Supply Chain Act. And on the right-hand side, there's the Supply Chain Act core team. That's a project group that meets fortnightly. It includes people from legal, it includes the chief compliance officer, internal audit is part of the team, and marketing also. Why marketing? Well, let's never forget that a lot of the information related to the Supply Chain Act has to be published on your website and elsewhere. Hence, marketing team. We also decided to bring on board the marketing team, because what were to happen if we were to be found guilty of a violation of the Supply Chain Act? That's why the marketing people are equally important as the other people. We've got a dedicated sustainability manager who's also part of the team. And last but not least, there's the head of risk management. Why? Because we treat anything to do with the Supply Chain Act as a risk management task, and we regularly report to the Executive Board on our Supply Chain Act performance, because potential penalties can amount to 2% of the previous year's turnover. But then we're also producing on behalf of the Federal Armed Forces. You won't find that in our logo, and you will be excluded from public tenders if you were to be found guilty of a violation of the supply chain, which would be very painful. I also communicated that in our training documents, so that's something that we must avoid at any cost. So that's the core team. However, the ultimate responsibility lies with the executive board, which is our chairman. We've got a person that's specifically responsible for the Supply Chain Act, that's me, and then there's three different categories. First, an environmental coordinator. Second, a human rights coordinator internally. Pretty busy in Turkey. And then there's the Supply Chain Act coordinator for our direct suppliers. So we spread the burden across three different positions, allowing everybody to go about their specific tasks or specific homework. Now, what are we doing in the context of this project team? It's very much based on the list of questions by BAFA related to the supply chain and catalog. It's been narrowed down a little, as you may have seen. It used to, comprise 170 questions, been reduced. The list is smaller now. There's only 15 pages anymore. But we would always guide our actions by these questions and decide who will answer these questions later on.
And then you should prepare to answer these questions in the report from the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. Then we've got the task force over here. Of course, we created a scenario as to what would happen if there is an incident that occurs. So this is a special case. The example is a supplier violated the Supply Chain Act. There was human rights violation. We had a case like that in the press. And then we set up a task force. It was all just documented and described. And then we have an external ombudsman for the system, for indicating if there were violations. And we went through it to see whether it would go through, pass a test from the Export Control Office. A lot of work, a lot of documents. I'll talk about it in a minute. Well, I should explain first what this Supply Chain Due Diligence Act is all about. And for this, I can promote the BME Association. Because here you see the source. This is the BME checklist for the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. And we've got a subgroup on sustainability and another one on supplier management. And we developed this together with both of those. So we said, okay, what has to be done? And this is an overview of the different types of due diligence you've got to adhere to. And it's actually relatively simple things to be done. It begins at the top like a clock. Preventive measures have to be developed. That's what the Act says. So you need an officer for human rights. Then you've got to do risk analysis. You've got to then, number 4, set up risk management for the Act. You've got to develop remedial measures. Number 5, then 6, measures for direct suppliers have to develop. And then you've got to set up a complaints system. You've got to draw up a fundamental declaration, and then you have ongoing documentation for annual reporting. And it was quite simple to explain this then. And as I said, the BME put this together in a simple fashion, and it's available to us members. And Andre had to spend a little more money. Yes. At that point in time, I didn't know about that subgroup, that group of specialists. And of course, then you start doing things yourself. And sometimes you don't see the forest for the trees. So we could talk about what you spent for the supplier code of conduct. And I won't tell you how much I spent. And I'm happy that my boss isn't here, so I wouldn't have to justify I spent so much money on something that it could have been easier to do. So what did we do? Well, first of all, it was very important to put together a team, so that we could meet as a group, and that team was already set up when I started at Schmitz Cargill. I became project manager there, and then it was important to establish responsibilities. I just showed that. We had to put together the organizational chart. We did that. And then formalities have to be drawn up and published. And I can give you a tip. if you're in the process of doing this, first make sure that the outside effect is correct, because right now we're being checked by the Export Control Office. And the first thing they publish there is information on the Whistleblower Act. Then the fundamental declaration. If you don't have that on your website, well, the Export Control Office will check that, and that's the first thing they look at. And we were worried that there might be some NGOs or other interest groups that would start suing the automotive industry, all companies one after another. So that's why we first of all did all of these formalities and made sure they were visible to people on the outside. And then we conducted a risk analysis. So of the 12,000 creditors, we analyzed which of them are risk suppliers. And then it was very important to train the purchasers and bring them on board to say, what does that mean for you in sourcing? What does that mean for you when you are working for or with low-cost countries? What does it mean if we violate this? I said, if you're blacklisted, you won't get any more public orders from the government. And then, of course, all of this was in the training. I did the training myself so that people were fully aware that it's not just something that's nice to have. It has to be taken seriously. And then we began with preventive measures with the risk suppliers. We're not quite done there. We do have a few bits of homework left to do. And I talked about the report to the German Export Control Office. I was saying that the report is the basis for organizing our project. So we're well organized on the basis of that. We were a little bit mixed up when they changed the list of questions, but we're flexible. We changed, and it had to be handed in. The answers had to be handed in by the end of May, and now it's June because of the changes, and then it's going to be published on our webpage. And then, after the Export Control Office report, you have to do the next risk analysis because it's done on an annual basis. So you start from square one again, and of course, we do learn some things. For instance, on the basis of cooperation, we learn things in training and so on. More about that later on. So the next risk analysis will definitely be done differently than the one that we just did. Okay. Well, then you see that there's a lot to do. So what did we do? Well, we had to, first of all, number one, develop preventive measures. And then people say, okay, we've got to have a code of conduct there. And we heard and received from our customers some documents. And the salespeople said to me, Andreas, can we sign that? Can we do it without signing it? Do I have to send it to our legal counsel and so on? And we said, just a minute, we might have something for you here at BME. And then we dealt with what we call the BME Code of Conduct. And we said, okay, now before each and every time, if let's say the different German grocery store chains come to talk to us about codes of conduct that we have to send to the legal counsel, they check it and comment on it, that each time it'll cost a lot of money. So maybe there's a standard. And then we had a look at the BME Code of Conduct. You can have a look at that at the BME webpage. And then our company, purchasing, brought it to the company and said, listen up, people, let's join them. Let's join that association. We can just point to that, and we can explain that to our customers. And then, lo and behold, that did work, works well. If the different German grocery store chains, Rewe, Edeka, Kaufland, want to see it, they can see the nice certificate there, signed by Ms. Meldikoff, and I stamp on it. I don't know whether they look at it in any more detail than that, but in any case, they say, that's great, that's fine. And I can say, Andre, it costs 250 euros every year. And every year, you've always got an up-to-date certificate if somebody wants to have a look at it. So that's something that's quite easy to do. This is something that we definitely have learned when we heard the presentation for the first time. I won't tell you what we spent, but it was a multiple of that. And another interesting thing about the Code of Conduct from the BME is that it's updated every year. So you always are ensured that it's adapted to new legislation in Germany and in Europe, for instance. And I would get a bill from our legal counsel every time otherwise. Yes, that's true. It's not free of charge. BME will always ask for the current documents from you. They have a look at them. and check whether you're doing everything right there. But it's quite quick and informal, and then you get your certificate again, and you can do that quite well. And this includes a supplier code of conduct. You've got to do that too. This includes elements of the BME code of conduct. It's a separate document. There are violations of the regulations. Okay, it says in the law that we have to do that too. And there you see the first tool, regular and incident-related controlling of suppliers. Well, we said, what's out in the market? What can you buy? There's lots of risk management tools. We opted for the pre-wave solution. I can tell you why. Why did I take pre-wave? Why did I want pre-wave? Well, they just look at the supplier abstractly without sending them all sorts of questionnaires by bombarding them and saying, do you do this, do you do that? They just do data screening off of the internet from databases, and they see what they can find, and then they can say, okay, that's how we monitor the supplier. And how that looks in detail, more about that later. And another thing we did was preventive measures. They had to be developed. We train our purchasing people and our suppliers, and for this we use a tool called EvoVadis. Why did we take this tool? Well, in our industry, that kind of became widespread, and for the entire subject of sustainability, we've got a little bit more material on that, training material and so on. And so that's why we use it. And we'll see the sequence of how it's done later on. Andrea, we've got 9 minutes. We've got to speed things up here a bit. Okay, yes. Let's see what we did, what measures we developed. This is very important. You have to be perfect in terms of what you show the outside world. So we looked at all of our documents and stored everything where it had to be done, the fundamental declaration, and then the whistleblower system. If somebody wants to complain, what happens? And these are documents that are mandatory. And it's mandatory that you, the company, commit that you're going to work for human rights and also include this in your supply chain. And you do that in the entire company. That's on our website. You can Google it. If you go to our Cargo Bull website, you'll see these things that are public. And there are things that aren't public. That's just for internal use. That's on the other side over there. That's our supply management manual. I had to put into there, when calls for bids go out, what does the purchaser have to take into account, taking these new things into consideration. And then the process is 30 pages long. It says who does what. That's the organizational chart. It has a precise description of if incident X happens, then this is what then will be the subsequent happening. And we have a campus. It's our Cargo Bull campus. It's our own learning academy. We have two types of training courses there. The first is fundamental training or basic training for purchasers. That's got to be done so that they even know what this is, the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, a couple hours. And then there's a special training course for all purchasers who are responsible for one of the risk suppliers, because they really have to be supported separately, and we did special training on that afterward. We said, okay, for you, this means the following. You've got to do this and that and the other thing, take this and that and the other thing into account. You have to adhere to these deadlines for the document submission. You've got to discuss things with that supplier. And what we're doing here is making sure that we don't leave these purchasers out in the rain alone, when the ones that are responsible for this. The next thing we did was, well, we've got a supply management tool that we got from QAD, and suppliers upload their documents there, supplier code of conduct and other documents like that. Anything that has to do with a call for bids. And then we have a company called Schleipen. That's our risk management tool, a tool that shows all of our risk, including financial risk. And for the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, we have that in there too. And then we worked with a company called Develop. It's not just for digital signatures, it's for archive system, because the Act says that the documents have got to be kept for 7 years. And we and our IT people sat down and thought about how everything that has to do with this Act should be kept. Emails, documents, decisions of the Board of Management, presentation, training documents, training materials, everything stored there so we can ensure that we do actually adhere to the 7-year mandatory maintenance of these documents. Okay, that's cool, Andre. Thank you. Officer for Human Rights, was it easy to find a person like that? Well, they can't be called that in our company. That was the position I looked for the longest time to fill. We have an officer for human rights in the internal parts of the company. Okay. Well, we too had to find someone, a human rights officer. Who wants to do that? And if you look at the law, it's got to be someone who reports directly to the top management. And another tip for your purchasing people, this is interesting, you can't do that internally yourself. Doesn't make sense. So that job has to be done somewhere else. That has to be done in finance or somewhere else, because, of course, he can't really effectively then monitor what you're doing in purchasing. They've got to do a few things, and so it should be someone else. And then we succeeded in getting the assistant from the head of sales to do this. She was already responsible system for the Whistleblower Protection Act, and we said, okay, you could be the human rights officer too, right? Otherwise, there's not much work to do with it. We talked about it in detail yesterday too, and it's working. It's working well. Okay, risk analysis then, number 5. In our own division, we've got to do that too. And heads up, it's not just our suppliers we're talking about here. It's talking about our entire division here. Everything that the brewery does, or everything that your companies do. So production too, whatever's going on in sales and so on. And I already said we use a tool called EcoVadis for assessing suppliers. But then I said, I want to know what EcoVadis does with the suppliers. What does it want to have from the suppliers? And we've got these nice medals. It can be gold, silver, or bronze, or platinum medal. And we said, okay, we'll do that too. We'll be on board there. And what EcoVadis does then with us costs about 2,000 euros, Andre, the EcoVadis assessment or scorecard. And then you supply a lot of documents there. They have a look at it and they say, this is how good you are. And this is a risk analysis for your own division. So that means you're done. And in purchasing, we collected all these documents, uploaded them, and I have to say that my employees did have a couple of days of work with that. But when you've done it, then you've done your risk analysis in your own division, have that assessment done with that scorecard, use those tools. And then you could also say, maybe there's some small subsidiaries somewhere. Well, when I talk about that, these are companies with 50 people, 100 people. They drive soft drinks around or something. They can't do that. So we have got to look at them too. And the suppliers go into our pre-wave tool, which means that all suppliers can be covered. We've got another 2 minutes. And pre-wave, how they do that, more on that in a minute. What else do we have to do? Number 4, well, we've got to set up risk management. We've got a round table like you do, but it's not as big. And we have put this into our sustainability group. It's integrated there. They have to prepare the sustainability report, discuss activities. We've got the human rights officer on there, and there's someone from the top management levels on board there too, and that's it. And then you have to develop remedial measures for your own division. We're always doing that anyway if risks do crop up there, and this has to be done as well. So we did the first screening, and fortunately we didn't have any major variants with pre-wave, just a couple small things. That was a core data problem. We just have 2 minutes. No, we're going to speed up. Now, let's say this is important for you. Do your homework, publish the things you have to do. And the Export Control Office says barrier-free access. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So publish your documents. Be open how you handle them. Don't hide them somewhere in the last tiny corner of your website. Link things up so that If you have a possible whistleblower, that person knows where to find it. Then, internally, we've got lots of transparency too. For all of our workers, we've got factories that are considered to be risk factories. We've got our Cargoable campus where you can do some learning. Another important point, and the Export Control Office asked us a couple questions and dealt with them. They were kindly. So barrier-free access to information, we produce trailers, and half of our people have a wrench in their hand and they don't have a computer. And barrier-free, you see it down there, it's a bulletin board. So you might put things on the bulletin board in the local language of the factory, not just German and English. So the Export Control Office said very clearly to us that barrier-free communication is important for this act, for whistleblowers in particular. And they told us what barrier-free means. So we did a bulletin board everywhere. It has a QR code. You can use your cell phone. You get the business card for the ombudsman immediately, and you can contact that person. So this is barrier-free communication. I wanted to show you that. Next chart. Okay, develop measures for direct suppliers. We don't have that yet. And then the next one is complaint management. That's on our homepage too. And if I say, well, it is still a little bit hidden somewhere, but I hope that our homepage can be freshened up a bit, and we could put it more in the foreground so it's easier to find. But it's on there anyway. And then what we did is, well, as I mentioned, the complaints management is done by the same person as human rights officer. We worked with PwC. There's a hotline. You can do it different ways. You can do it more cheaply than with PwC. And then the basic declaration, we put that together, put it on our homepage. It has to be passed by top management. And then you've got to be lucky sometimes. The annual report to the Export Control Office. We're not going to do that now, yet, because as far as we understand it, we have 1,000 people. We're below the 1,000 people threshold. But if they come and say, you have to, we'll be there, then we'll be using Pre-Wave to help us out. We'll have a look at a report like that and see what happens. Apart from that, of course, we are always going to check our sourcing processes. What about our new suppliers? What about subsidiaries? And let me give you a number here. 2,822 suppliers. That's what we studied with the Pre-Wave tool. 12 buyers, 12 purchasers did training. And here on this chart, maybe I have to do this at the beginning next time. Here you have our cascade, screening all suppliers with Pre-Wave, and then our high-risk suppliers that we had previously defined, our quality-related suppliers, bottles, cans, and so on, but also marketing suppliers. For us, these companies also have to be modeled in EcoVadis. It's tough to get the suppliers, to motivate the suppliers to do this. And of course, we have incident-related audits, corrective measures. We do those too. That's on the right-hand side of the chart. And in the charts, you'll find a screenshot of Pre-Wave like this. This is what it looks like. I won't go into the details. And here too, it's very important to have this for management, a nice risk analysis matrix. Ideally, you have nothing in red, but you still have some things that you have to do some work on, and it's always nice to be able to show that to top management. Well, this is David versus Goliath. You might think that you have more money than we do, and we can afford all these software solutions, but I wasn't given that much money. So I just used existing tools. Risks identification, risk assessment, prioritization. I had to give purchasers the opportunity to assess the risk suppliers. Maybe there were audits that had been done. And then we went on to the next step. And of course, we based this on the report to the Export Control Office. What are the next steps? What we do is this. We have a look at what's going on with that act, and then we prepare the CSRD. We're doing a new sustainability report for for 2024, then the daily work, sustainability and purchasing processes. And then here we have some promotion for BME Sustainability Summit 4 and 5, that 4th and 5th of June 2024. What are you doing? Well, we're preparing for the BAFA reports that we've got to submit soon. That's the end of May, but we have a BAFA audit, export control audit. That's the 10th of May where we have to submit those documents. And last chart, really the last chart, I just wanted to give you some ideas about what you should do. Next chart, please. Oh, you've got another one? This really is the last one. So get some information about this act. You go to YouTube, and you get some legal experts explaining that. And the German government has the help desk, and they do wonderful training. You can get the training course free of charge, participate in it for no charge. And you can join forces with others like we did here, or I can do it with other companies from the city of Münster. And then BME offers a lot too. We've got the supplier code of conduct of the BME. Andreas just talked about it. We have seminars about how to draw up the report. I didn't participate in that yet, but one's going to be held on the 30th of April. And then we have Sustainability Session 1. These are the solution days, and that means that all of the software vendors that Andreas was talking about, Pre-Wave, and there are many, many others, I know about 10 or 11 of them, they use pitches to present their companies. BME organizes that. There's training for human rights officers. And we have our human rights officers for internal human rights officer. That's going to be held on the 17th of June, and I'm a guest at the Sustainability Summit in Darmstadt, which will be held on the 4th and 5th of June. People of a similar mind will be meeting there talking about sustainability and the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, and it's great for doing networking. We met there last year, but we had previously known each other, and we were able to expand our network there, both of us. Okay, great. That was it. You can get these charts if you wish. He'll take care of it. Okay, first of all, thank you very much. Let me once again say, my colleague will be walking around. If you're interested in getting all the charts, give us your business card, and we will make sure you get all of these charts. If you've already handed in your business card, that's enough because you'll automatically be getting all of the charts. Okay, thank you very much for the interesting and entertaining presentation. There are differences, but there are parallels. As we said, sometimes you're taking the same path, sometimes different paths. And we had a representative, a major German corporation represented on the stock market, the DAX stock market index, and we had a smaller company too. So any questions now for either of the speakers? Eberhard Knorr, just one question. It's simple. There's one abbreviation I didn't hear. BAFA. What was that all about? That's the Federal Office for Export Control and something else, and Foreign Trade. It's an authority. It's the Export Control Office. I see. So it's the authority for, I'll tell you later on. What is it called? The Federal Office for Export Control in Eschborn, right next to where we're located. And that sometimes is a little bit of concern for us when there's lots of protests going on there and all the police all around there. Any more questions? If it's okay, I will hand the microphone over to you. I have a question. We've had a lot of projects in the past few years about serialization. It's more for maybe the consumer area. Is this part of what you do? Serialization, doing things safely and securely with serialization. What do you mean by serialization? Well, serialization of products. In other words, from the production plant on to whatever? You mean putting serial numbers on there? Well, not quite. It's like a QR code. You put more information on there than just the serial number. Well, what I can tell you is our products do have a serial number. I know what you're talking about, but it has something to do with traceability for us. If I do a recall campaign and it's a trailer generation X, Y, or Z, if there was a faulty part put in there, or if there was a problem in production, I think you're talking about that, right? Yes, but you can use that to control things, and you can do preventive vehicle production. So if you want to be able to prove to your customers that a certain percentage is from European countries in that final product, then you can do that. You can say, this is a special kind of vehicle, has a different tax rate. So it has nothing to do with the Supply Chain Act. Okay, thank you once again for the great presentation from those two companies. I thought it was really good. One thing, I'm a human being and I'm looking around here. I was in India several times and I work for a big German company. We've all implemented all these things for years, but nobody has a look at it. And when you see people working in the dirt and oil, it's not even covered by those processes. That's one point that I want to mention. Maybe BME can have a look at there. The local loops, so to speak. How can you control and check that so these things are really done? Because in India, okay, they don't have, caste differences aren't allowed, but people are still exploited. What about the local loop? Well, that's what I was talking about. You should put these types of things right at the entrance to the factory for the whistleblowers. The suppliers ought to do this too. That's wishful thinking. I'm wondering if we give it to them, how long it'll be hanging there. Okay, I'm very, very sorry that I have to end this very lively discussion. Thanks very much to both of you.